Welcome to Javel Stories. Before we continue with the story, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell to always get notified for upcoming stories, and also share the story with loved ones and friends. Thank you very much. Carol sat on the edge of her bed, the morning sunlight filtering through her thin curtains, bathing the room in a golden hue. She reached for her journal on the nightstand, the leather cover soft under her frail fingers. This journal had been her sanctuary, a place where she poured out her thoughts, her fears, and her love for Eric, a love she had kept hidden. She opened to a blank page, her pen hovering in hesitation. Each word felt like a farewell, and yet she couldn't bring herself to stop writing. Dear Eric, there's so much I want to say, but don't know how to begin. You've brought light into my darkest days, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. I wish I could tell you everything, but I've chosen to protect you instead. I hope one day you'll forgive me for the silence, and remember me not as the woman who left you too soon, but as the one who cherished every moment she had with you. Her hand trembled as she finished the letter. Folding it neatly, she placed it into an envelope and wrote his name on the front. It was the third letter she had written to him this week, none of which she had the courage to deliver. The sound of the front door creaking open startled her. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Fowler, who had been helping her with groceries and errands. Carol quickly slipped the envelope into a drawer and put on a smile as Mrs. Fowler entered the room. "How are we feeling today, dear?" Mrs. Fowler asked, her tone laced with concern. "Better," Carol lied. The truth was, the pain had grown unbearable. Each passing day left her weaker, her once vibrant spirit now a flickering flame. But she refused to let anyone, especially Eric, see her like this. She had made a choice to leave him with memories of laughter and love, not of sorrow and suffering. The alarm clock buzzed on Eric's bedside table, pulling him out of a restless sleep. He reached out to silence it, his hand brushing against a framed photograph of Carol. In the picture, she was laughing, her head thrown back, eyes sparkling with joy. Eric smiled, remembering the day they had taken that photo. They had spent the afternoon at the park, feeding ducks and sharing stories under the shade of an old oak tree. He got out of bed and stretched, the morning light pouring through the windows of his small apartment. His mind wandered to Carol, as it often did. She had been distant lately, her once frequent calls now sporadic. He wondered if she was losing interest, the thought filling him with unease. Eric brewed a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the room, and decided to call her. As the phone rang, he rehearsed what he wanted to say. "Good morning, Carol. Just wanted to hear your voice and see if you're up for a walk today." But the call went unanswered. Disappointed, Eric set the phone down and took a sip of his coffee. He tried to shake off the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Carol had always been full of life, her laughter infectious, but lately she had seemed different. Deciding not to dwell on it, Eric grabbed his running shoes and headed out the door. Running had always been his way of clearing his mind. As he jogged through the quiet streets, he replayed moments with Carol in his head, the way she lit up a room, the way her voice softened when she talked about her dreams. He resolved to visit her later that day, determined to bridge the growing distance between them. Back in her small, cozy house, Carol stared at her phone, her heart aching as she saw Eric's missed call. She wanted so badly to answer, to hear his voice and lose herself in the comfort it brought. But she couldn't. Her illness had progressed faster than she had anticipated. The doctors had given her months, but her body told her otherwise. She had started hospice care last week, a decision she had made alone. She didn't want to burden anyone, least of all Eric. As the day wore on, Carol's strength waned. She moved to the living room and settled into her favorite armchair, the one where she and Eric had spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing. She closed her eyes, imagining him sitting across from her, his warm smile erasing her pain. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Mrs. Fowler again, this time with a pot of homemade soup. "You really don't have to do this," Carol said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nonsense," Mrs. Fowler replied. "You've always been there for everyone else. Now it's time for us to be here for you." As Carol sipped the soup, she thought about Eric once more. She wondered if he would forgive her for keeping him in the dark. Would he understand why she had made this choice? That evening, she wrote another letter. This one was different. It was a goodbye. My dearest Eric, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer by your side. I want you to know that every moment with you was a gift. Please don't let my absence bring you sorrow. Remember me with a smile and live your life to the fullest. I'll always be with you in the laughter of the wind, the warmth of the sun, and the whispers of the rose. Love always, Carol. She sealed the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others, her heart heavy but at peace. Later that night, Eric stood outside Carol's house, a bouquet of daisies in hand. He had decided to surprise her, hoping to reignite the connection that seemed to be slipping away. As he knocked on the door, his heart raced. Would she be happy to see him, or had he misread the signals? When Carol opened the door, Eric was struck by how frail she looked. Her smile was still there, but it was tinged with an exhaustion he couldn't ignore. Eric, she said, her voice soft but warm, this is a surprise. I missed you, he admitted, stepping inside. Are you okay? You look tired. I'm fine, she lied, ushering him to the living room. Just a little under the weather. As they talked, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. But Carol, ever the master of deflection, steered the conversation away from herself, focusing instead on Eric's latest adventures. For a moment, it felt like old times, but beneath the surface, both of them knew that things would never be the same again. Eric couldn't sleep that night. The image of Carol, her fragile frame, her pale complexion, haunted him. Something was wrong, but she wasn't telling him what. He knew Carol well enough to recognize when she was hiding something. Her smile, though genuine, was laced with an unspoken sadness. The next morning, Eric decided he couldn't let his doubts fester. He would confront her, not out of anger, but out of love. He wanted to be there for her, no matter what she was going through. Carol, on the other hand, was sitting by her window, watching the world pass by. The sunlight danced on the petals of the rose bush Eric had planted for her weeks ago. It was their rose, a symbol of the love they had shared in such a short time. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She knew it was Eric before she even opened it. His presence was undeniable, a comforting warmth that filled her home. Eric, she said, surprised to see him so early. We need to talk, he said, his tone gentle but firm. Carol hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, the tension palpable. What's going on, Carol? Eric asked, his eyes searching hers. You've been distant and now you look... I don't know. You're not okay, are you? She looked away, her hands trembling at her lap. I'm fine, Eric. You don't have to worry about me. Don't do that, he said, leaning forward. Don't shut me out. If something's wrong, I want to know. I need to know. Carol felt the tears welling up in her eyes. She had spent so long trying to protect him, but now she realized she couldn't hide the truth any longer. I'm sick, Eric, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been sick for a while now. Eric froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Sick? What do you mean? Is it serious? She nodded, her tears falling freely now. It's cancer. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors... They said there's nothing more they can do. For a moment, the room was silent. Eric struggled to process what he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was choked with emotion. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Why did you keep this from me? I didn't want you to worry, she said, her gaze fixed on the floor. I wanted our time together to be happy, not overshadowed by this. Eric shook his head, tears streaming down his face. Carol, don't you understand? I would have been there for you. I want to be there for you. You don't have to go through this alone. Her heart ached at his words, but she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. I didn't want you to suffer, Eric. I didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Eric reached out and took her hand in his. I'm here now, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. From that day forward, Eric became a constant presence in Carol's life. He accompanied her to doctor's appointments, helped with errands, and spent hours by her side, talking, laughing, and reminiscing. Despite her deteriorating condition, Carol felt a renewed sense of purpose. Eric's unwavering support gave her strength, and their bond grew deeper with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Carol turned to Eric and said, "Promise me something." "Anything," he replied without hesitation. "Promise me you'll live your life to the fullest after I'm gone," she said. "Don't let my death hold you back. Find happiness again." Eric's heart clenched at the thought of losing her, but he nodded. "I promise," he said, though the words felt like a betrayal of his love for her. Carol smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. As her condition worsened, Carol spent more time writing. She poured her heart into letters for Eric, letters she hoped would guide him through the pain of losing her. Each letter was a reflection of their time together, a memory, a lesson, a reminder of her love. She left instructions with Mrs. Fowler to deliver the letters to Eric after her passing. One evening, as she finished the final letter, Carol placed it in the drawer with the others. She looked out the window, the stars twinkling in the night sky, and whispered, "I love you, Eric." The day Carol had been dreading finally arrived. Her body, frail and exhausted, could no longer fight the battle it had been waging. Eric was by her side, holding her hand as she lay in the hospital bed. He tried to stay strong for her, but the tears wouldn't stop. "I don't want you to go," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't want to go either," she admitted. "But it's my time." She looked into his eyes, her gaze filled with love and determination. "Promise me you'll remember the good times, Eric. Promise me you'll be happy." "I promise," he said, though his heart was breaking. With her last breath, Carol whispered, "Never forget that I loved you." And then she was gone. Eric sat in the sterile hospital room long after Carol's final breath, her hand still in his. The air was heavy, the silence deafening. He felt hollow, as though a piece of his soul had been ripped away. The nurses gently urged him to leave, their sympathetic glances doing little to ease his anguish. Reluctantly, he let go of her hand, whispering a final goodbye before walking out into the cold night. The drive home was a blur. Every corner of his apartment reminded him of her. The blanket she had curled under during their movie nights, the coffee mug she favored, the rose bush visible from his window. He collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The grief was overwhelming, suffocating. That night, Eric didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, replaying every moment he had shared with Carol, every word she had spoken. He clung to the memory of her laugh, her touch, her smile. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the crushing reality she was gone. The next morning, Eric dragged himself to work, the routine a small comfort in the face of his loss. He felt like a ghost moving through the motions without truly being present. When he opened his locker, he froze. Inside was a single red rose, its petals vibrant and fresh. Next to it was a small note written in Carol's familiar handwriting, "I care for you and I always will." Eric's knees nearly buckled as he clutched the note. He could hear her voice in his head, soft and reassuring. He knew this was her way of reminding him that her love would never leave him, even in death. Later that evening, Mrs. Fowler came by with a small box. Her eyes were red, her voice thick with emotion. "Carol wanted me to give this to you," she said, handing him the box. "She wrote these for you, said they'd help you when she was gone." Eric took the box with trembling hands. Inside were several envelopes, each one labeled with a specific moment. "For when you miss me most, for when you feel lost, for when you find love again." The first envelope was labeled simply, "For now." With a deep breath, Eric opened it. "My dearest Eric, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I can only imagine the pain you must be feeling, but I want you to know that you are not alone. My love for you is eternal, and I will always be with you, in your heart and in your memories. Take each day as it comes. Allow yourself to grieve, but don't let it consume you. Life is still beautiful, Eric. Live it for both of us." Tears streamed down his face as he read the letter. Her words were a balm to his aching heart, reminder that she had thought of him even in her final days. The days turned into weeks, and though the pain didn't disappear, It became a part of Eric's life, a quiet ache that accompanied him everywhere. He clung to the letters Carol had written, opening them when the weight of her absence felt unbearable. In her words, he found comfort and strength. She had anticipated his pain, his doubts, his moments of despair. Each letter was a lifeline, pulling him back from the depths of his grief. One letter, labeled for when you feel lost, contained a simple but powerful message. Eric, remember the rose bush? It's still there, just like my love for you. Take care of it and it will take care of you. You are stronger than you think. Eric found himself standing in front of the rose bush later that evening. Its blooms were vibrant, their fragrance filling the air. He knelt down and began to tend to it, his movements slow and deliberate. For the first time since her death, he felt a small glimmer of peace. One afternoon, Eric decided to visit the park where he and Carol had spent their happiest days. The old oak tree still stood tall, its branches reaching out like arms offering comfort. He sat beneath it, pulling out another letter. For when you need to remember, it read, Eric, do you remember our first picnic here? You brought that awful potato salad, and I couldn't stop teasing you about it. We laughed until our sides hurt. That's how I want you to remember me. Not as someone who left too soon, but as someone who loved you with everything she had. Eric smiled through his tears, the memory flooding back with vivid clarity. He could almost hear her laughter, feel her hand in his. With each letter, Eric found the strength to face the world again. He returned to his routines, though they now carried a bittersweet undertone. He began journaling, pouring his thoughts and feelings onto the pages. It became a way to connect with Carol, to share his life with her even though she was gone. One day, as he flipped through his journal, he found himself writing about his hopes for the future, a future he hadn't dared to think about since her death. Carol's words echoed in his mind. Live your life to the fullest. Find happiness again. Months later, Eric stood before the rose bush, now fuller and more vibrant than ever. He felt a sense of pride, knowing he had kept his promise to Carol. As he walked back inside, he noticed a flyer on his counter. It was for a local charity event, one Carol had always talked about attending but never had the chance to. With a deep breath, Eric decided to go. It was time to honor her memory by living the life she had wanted for him. The charity event was held in the town's community center, a place Carol had loved for its warmth and sense of belonging. Eric hadn't attended anything like this since her death, and as he stepped inside, he felt an odd mixture of anxiety and resolve. The hall was filled with people of all ages, their laughter and chatter creating a lively atmosphere. Booths lined the walls, offering handmade crafts, baked goods, and information about various community initiatives. Eric wandered through the crowd, his hands in his pockets. He didn't know what he was looking for, perhaps a sign, something that would remind him of Carol and make him feel closer to her. Hi there, a cheerful voice said, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see a woman standing behind a booth decorated with vibrant flowers. She had a warm smile and kind eyes that immediately put him at ease. Are you interested in gardening? She asked, gesturing to a stack of pamphlets. Eric glanced at the display, noticing a small pot with a blooming red rose. His heart skipped a beat. Actually, I've been tending a rose bush lately. It was important to someone I cared about. The woman's smile softened. Roses are special, aren't they? They require patience and care, but the reward is always worth it. Her words resonated with him, and for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of connection with someone new. The woman introduced herself as Natalie, a volunteer who ran the community garden. She explained how the charity event was raising funds to expand the garden and provide fresh produce to local families in need. Eric found himself drawn into a conversation with her, sharing stories about his rose bush and the lessons he had learned from caring for it. Natalie listened intently, her genuine interest making him feel comfortable. By the end of the evening, she handed him a flyer. We could always use more volunteers at the garden. If you're interested, stop by sometime. Eric hesitated, but something in her eyes reminded him of Carol's words. Live your life to the fullest. I'll think about it, he said, slipping the flyer into his pocket. The following Saturday, Eric found himself standing at the entrance of the community garden. Rows of plants stretched before him, their vibrant greens and colorful blooms a testament to the care they received. Natalie greeted him with a smile, handing him a pair of gardening gloves. "Glad you could make it," she said. As they worked side by side, planting seeds and weeding beds, Eric felt a sense of calm wash over him. The physical labor was grounding, and the garden itself felt like a place of healing. He told Natalie about Carol, how she had loved flowers, and how the rose bush in his yard was a symbol of their love. Natalie listened with compassion, her presence comforting yet unobtrusive. "She sounds like she was an incredible person," Natalie said softly. "She was," Eric replied, his voice tinged with both sorrow and gratitude. That evening, Eric sat at his kitchen table, the box of letters in front of him. There were still several unopened envelopes, each one waiting for the right moment. He picked one labeled for "When you find a reason to smile again." "Eric, if you're reading this, it means you've started to heal. I'm so proud of you. I know how hard it must have been to take those first steps, but you did it. Keep going. Keep finding reasons to smile, to laugh, to love. You deserve happiness, Eric. Don't ever forget that." Her words brought tears to his eyes, but this time, they weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of hope. Over the next few weeks, Eric became a regular at the community garden. He found solace in the rhythm of planting and nurturing, and he grew closer to Natalie. She wasn't Carol, and she never tried to be. But there was something about her, a quiet strength, a genuine kindness, that reminded him of the love he had lost. One day, as they worked together, Natalie asked, "Do you ever think about starting over? Not forgetting, but moving forward?" Eric paused, her question hanging in the air. He thought about Carol's letters, her unwavering belief that he could find happiness again. "I think I'm starting to," he said. As spring turned to summer, Eric and Natalie's friendship deepened. They spent hours in the garden sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. One afternoon, Natalie invited Eric to her home for dinner. Her small apartment was filled with plants, their vibrant greenery making the space feel alive. As they ate, Natalie opened up about her own struggles, how she had lost her father to cancer, and how the garden had become her sanctuary. "You remind me of him," she said. "He had the same resilience, the same love for life, even in the face of loss." Eric felt a pang of emotion. "It's hard," he admitted, "but I think Carol would want me to find joy again, to keep living." Natalie smiled, her eyes shining with understanding. "And you will, one day at a time." One evening, Eric invited Natalie over to see the rose bush. As they stood in the yard, the setting sun casting a warm glow, Eric shared the story of how it had come to symbolize his love for Carol. "It's beautiful," Natalie said, reaching out to touch one of the blooms. "And so are the memories it holds." At that moment, Eric realized that his heart, though scarred, still had room for new connections. As the weeks passed, Eric began to notice a shift in his feelings toward Natalie. Their friendship had blossomed naturally, rooted in shared experiences and mutual understanding. But now, he felt something deeper, a quiet yearning he hadn't expected. One evening, as they walked through the community garden, Natalie pointed to a new bed of roses she had planted. "These reminded me of your story," she said with a soft smile. Eric looked at the flowers, their vibrant petals glistening in the fading sunlight. He thought of Carol, of the promise he had made to her, and of the letter she had written urging him to find happiness. "Natalie," he said, his voice hesitant but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about what's next for me, about letting myself feel again." She turned to him, her expression open but cautious. And I think you've helped me realize that it's okay to move forward," he admitted. "It doesn't mean forgetting Carol. It means honoring her by living the way she wanted me to." Natalie reached out and gently took his hand. "You don't have to rush into anything, Eric. Healing takes time, and I'm here for you no matter what." Her words were a balm to his heart. For the first time, he felt the possibility of love again, not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as something new and equally beautiful. That night, Eric opened another letter from the box. This one was labeled for "When you fall in love again." "My dearest Eric, if you're reading this, it means you've found someone who makes your heart sing again. I'm so happy for you. Love is a gift, and you deserve to experience it in all its forms. Remember, it's okay to love again. It doesn't diminish what we had, it honors it. Love with your whole heart, Eric, and know that I'm cheering for you from wherever I am. Tears filled his eyes as he read her words. Carol had given him her blessing, and that knowledge filled him with both sadness and hope. Eric and Natalie continued to grow closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. They spent evenings cooking together, sharing quiet conversations, and even tending to the rose bush in Eric's yard. Their relationship was slow and deliberate, a mutual understanding of the delicate balance between past and present. Eric found comfort in Natalie's patience, her willingness to let him grieve even as he began to open his heart to her. One evening, as they sat on Eric's porch, Natalie asked, "Do you ever feel guilty for moving on?" Eric considered her question, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I did at first," he admitted, "but Carol wanted this for me. She made me promise to live, to find happiness again. And I think I'm starting to—" Natalie smiled, her hand brushing against his. "She sounds like an incredible person." "She was," Eric said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And so are you." As summer gave way to autumn, Eric found himself falling in love with Natalie. It was a quiet, steady kind of love, different from what he had experienced with Carol, but no less profound. One day, he brought her a single red rose from the bush in his yard. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her. "It's a symbol of everything you've helped me rediscover." Natalie accepted the rose with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Eric, for trusting me with your heart." Eric took Natalie to the park where he and Carol had shared so many memories. As they sat under the old oak tree, he told her about their picnics, their laughter, and the love that had shaped him. "This place will always be special to me," he said. "But it's not just about the past. It's about the future, too." Natalie rested her head on his shoulder. "Then let's make some new memories here." Months later, Eric reached the last letter in the box. It was labeled simply "For the day you're ready." With trembling hands, he opened it. "Eric, if you've reached this letter, it means you've found peace. You've allowed yourself to heal, to love, and to live. I couldn't ask for more. Thank you for being my light in the darkness. I will always love you, and I will always be with you. Now go and be happy, my love. You deserve it. Forever yours, Carol." Eric held the letter to his chest, his heart full of gratitude and love. Carol's words had guided him through his darkest days, and now they gave him the courage to embrace the future. One evening, as the first snow of winter fell, Eric knelt in front of Natalie in the garden they had both come to cherish. "Natalie, you've brought light back into my life. You've shown me that it's possible to heal and to love again. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Natalie's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Eric. 1,000 times yes." On their wedding day, Eric placed a single red rose on Carol's grave. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." As he walked away, hand in hand with Natalie, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known was possible. The rose bush in his yard bloomed brighter than ever that year, a testament to the enduring power of love, loss, and renewal. In the whispers of the wind, Eric could almost hear Carol's voice. "Live your life to the fullest." And so